Hi, I'm Christine Poplau, and I'm a senior manager in the advisory services department here at Broadloom. Today, we're going to talk about some real world fraud issues and ways to prevent them. Hopefully, these topics and discussion will help you in your business going forward. So, we're going to discuss what to do when it happens to you. When fraud happens, what should you do? Some of the areas of your business that might be impacted by fraud, and some safety measures for preventing fraud. The first thing you should do when fraud happens is number one, contact the bank or the credit card company immediately. They should advise you if law enforcement should be contacted. You'll want to make sure and have a list of everything that you believe that's happened to either your credit card or your bank account. Um, any of the what activity is actually fraudulent. And depending on the dollar amount, they may want you to get law enforcement involved. And then finally, your insurance company. You should contact your insurance company, let them know, because you may be covered by insurance for some of your losses if they're not already covered by your bank or credit card company. What areas of your business could be impacted? Well, obviously, cash and credit cards, those are going to be the main areas where you're going to see fraud take place. You're going to experience losses. But you can also experience loss with your inventory or even customer lists and pricing. So, how can we prevent fraud? There's several ways that we can prevent it. And these are things that you can just do in your business that are good business practices, number one. The first thing is internal controls. You'll want to make sure that you've got a separation of duties. You don't want to have one person have complete control over a lifespan of a transaction. So, for example, in installer payments, you don't want the one person to set up an installer, to schedule an installer, get the labor bill, post the labor bill, and then write the check. Obviously, that seems like a lot of steps for one person, but in smaller businesses, that can happen. That you've just got one person doing that. So it's always good to have somebody else somehow involved in that process. The next thing that you can do is to make sure that you're reconciling your accounts. Make sure that your bank accounts and credit cards are reconciled on a monthly basis. Um, you you find so many things by doing that, and it also just ensures that you know where you are financially. Also, look over expense statements. If you've got employees that are turning in expense statements, you want to make sure that somebody else who's not involved in that payment process is actually approving it. It's pretty easy for a salesperson to develop a relationship with someone in accounts payable and say, hey, I'm going to push this through with this receipt and I'll split the money with you. We'd hate to think that that would happen, but it does happen. So make sure that you've got somebody else involved in that reconciliation process. For inventory, some of the internal controls would be cycle counts, making sure that you're getting in there, you're looking at your inventory, you're verifying the balances against what your valuation shows. And then finally, also verifying that material that's leaving the warehouse, making sure that you have a warehouse person and the customer, the installer, signing off that they took a certain amount of inventory. And then finally, always is monitoring your financial statements. Your financial statements are going to show you a track record or history of how much you're spending. And if you see expense accounts that are all of a sudden increasing and you haven't changed anything, that gives you leave to investigate and find out why that expense account is increasing. Another area to just help prevent it is your company culture. You want to create a sense of culture, or a culture of ethics and honesty with your employees and customers. If you set that tone, your employees will realize that dishonesty is not acceptable, and that trying to steal is not going to be met with just this slap on the wrist, that you're going to take it seriously. Fair employment practices also let your employees know that they really are trusted and that they're going to be treated fairly. So another area would be computer protection. Make sure that all your computers have the correct antivirus software. You remind your employees not to click on suspicious links or open weird emails. Let your employees know that you're never going to send them an email to ask them to go buy a bunch of gift cards and send them to you. Keystroke loggers can also gain access to your secure information and break into your account and take money or transfer it via ACH. And I'll admit that that happened in a company that I worked with. And because we did daily bank reconciliations, where we looked at what was clearing the bank, we found it within hours and were able to stop it and get our money back. So let's talk about the specific types of fraud and what you can do to prevent those specific items. For cash fraud, receipts, so any money coming into the business, what you need to do is if you're accepting checks, you want to verify that the information on the bank check agrees. So there's two spots on your check, one at the top and one at the bottom that says the bank name. Make sure that those agree. Make sure that the fonts agree on the check, that there's not different fonts all over it. That's going to indicate that it could be a washed check. And then also, if the check looks weird, you can look up the bank and what their routing number is on the internet and make sure that those agree as well. If you are receiving, walk-in traffic with checks, get a copy of their driver's license, so that you have some sort of proof on that. Another thing for receipts is make sure that your deposits are done daily. Make sure that you are actually taking either the checks to the bank or that you're doing a remote capture deposit. If you get a lot of mail and you have a lot of payments that come via the mail, have one person open the mail and total the amount of the checks, and then give it to your accounts receivable person or whomever to post those checks and create a deposit slip. And then you ensure that that deposit slip total agrees with the total that was done by the person opening the mail. That way checks aren't accidentally not getting deposited. Usually your customers will notify you when that happens, if you send them a statement or you call them on a late bill. But this way, you're just ensuring that there's a practice taking place that will show your employees as well how seriously you take this information. On outgoing checks, you could have employees that are washing those checks, or you could get checks in that have been washed. But a washed check, someone uses some chemicals to change the data, whether it's the payee or the amount. You can usually determine on outgoing checks, if you're reviewing your cleared checks on your bank statement, you usually have an image and you can look at that and see, make sure that none of those look suspicious. A solution for outgoing check fraud would be to use a positive pay, where when you cut a number of checks, you send a report to your bank to say, this is the check number, the payee, and the amount. And then the bank won't cash a check that doesn't show up on that list. So that's the upside. The downside is every time you write a check, you do need to send it, but it's well worth it to ensure that you are getting the protection that you need in your account. And then a final thing for cash fraud would be to verify your vendors. And this kind of goes back to the issue with the separation of duties, is you want to make sure that when you hire a new installer or you have a new vendor, that it is a legitimate person or business, that someone's not just setting up a vendor and writing checks to themselves. Separation of duties will take care of that usually, and also ensuring that someone who is setting up a payable amount is not also the person approving the final check that goes out. For inventory, in addition to cash, inventory is an asset that can be compromised. You could have people taking inventory out of your warehouse all the time and not even realize it if you don't set up those controls in your warehouse. So there may be an area of your warehouse, if you do installations, where your installers are not allowed to go past a certain area. When inventory is taken out of the warehouse, the installer and a warehouse person should be signing off on that. You should be doing cycle counts. This verifies the inventory in a certain bay or in a certain row, that inventory is there. And then physical counts. A physical count annually or biannually verifies the inventory is there. It also finds inventory that's not there. I'm sorry, it also finds inventory that could be missing, or inventory that's not on the listing but that's in there. That's a good way to make sure that you are really taking care of your inventory, that you're paying attention to it, and that you have processes and procedures in place for when inventory is returned to the warehouse from a job site, that it is properly handled. And then finally, use a good software system. Use a software system that gives you the detailed inventory information, that provides you with a report that when inventory is changed, or provides you with a report that shows you where all your inventory is. It doesn't just give you a listing of purchases. It says you have this piece of inventory, it's in this location, it costs this much, and you received it on this day. And then finally, customers. Without a strong ERP system, you don't know that your customer listings and your pricing are not just floating around somewhere on a piece of paper. With a strong ERP system like Broadloom Management System, your customers and their pricing are in the system. You don't have to have that piece of paper that might be sitting on someone's desk with what customer A pays versus what customer B pays. It protects your customers, it protects your reputation, and it's just an additional safety measure that you can take to help prevent fraud of your customer list. I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. Hopefully you got some good information that will help you in the future with your business and protecting it.
All right, so this is one of the webinars I love the most, because we keep these updates short and sweet, and the information in it is just so incredibly helpful. And for those who have joined us for many of these webinars, fraud is just attacking this industry. And as Christine walked us through, there are so many ways that you can safeguard your business, whether it's through processes, through technology. There are ways for you to do it, but you have to do the work, right? So when we're looking at real world fraud prevention, Stephanie, I know you've seen this time and time and time again. Why do people fall trap to it? Is it, just not knowing where to look, what things to be looking for in the books? Because even when you're talking about it, I'm like, that might happen to me.
Well, people generally want to be helpful. They want to help other people. They want to, they want to do their best at a job. So, you find out, hey, the owner just texted me and wants a deposit made on some job. I want to do that. I want to make sure that we get that job, or that we do that. And what they really just need to do is take a step back and say, wow, owner's never asked me to do this before. I should probably pick up the phone and call him, or text his phone number that I know I have. But it really is generally because people want to be helpful.
And look, people have the best intentions, but there's also a lot of bad actors out there.
Yes.
And you see a lot of bad actors who are very smart and know how to use technology to manipulate and take advantage of small businesses. And look, it's easy for us to say, oh, this is happening at flooring businesses, these sort of scams. Who's going to fall trap to that? Probably shouldn't be saying this, but this happens everywhere. In fact, we've had some instances where someone gets a mysterious text message from Todd asking for them to go buy 30 gift cards all at $500 across
Mhm.
all these different places. And what you're saying here, I think, is really good point of view. Right? People want to help. People want to do their jobs, especially if it's coming from the owner or someone in leadership.
Yep.
And sometimes we're like, we're just, we're always doing, right? My advice, it's very simple, right? If this is outside your core responsibilities, right? So if you're the person that is picking up X for the company every week, and you get that text, okay, that probably maps. But then if this is something that is not part of your day to day, and you're going to be spending money, I don't think any owner or any management team is going to be upset with that extra check.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of what you're saying, there's so much common sense in this, but it's only when you see it, right? It's only when it's laid out in front of you, like, oh, of course, why would I do that? But in our day to day, we get lost so quickly. So we had a bunch of questions come in via email. I've given up on asking people to only submit them in the chat. So we're going to get to those questions right now. And anyone else that is on, shoot over questions while we get these going. So first question, okay. Well, Christine, I mean,
we jumped the gun.
between this and between the fraud presentation we did about 2 months ago or so, it's literally happening. Like, look at this is literally happening as we speak, and that's why we do these webinars, to talk about the real issues that that our clients are encountering, to avoid them in the future. So question is, what do I do if I get an email or text from the, okay, it's literally what we were just talking about. Okay. Asking to send a deposit to a vendor I've not heard of. If I had, Christine, we're buddies. If you text me and said, hey, this random person is asking for some cash, do you mind sending it over? I ain't doing that. There has to be some gates there. So, Christine, just to sort of reinforce it, what do we do? What do we do in that circumstance?
Well, number one, if it's an email, you can hover over the name and see if the email address matches what the company email address is. If it's a text, hopefully your owner you have in your phone with a contact. So it's going to show up from them instead of saying, hey, this is Todd, or on a separate, on a different phone line. You're going to call. You're going to pick up the phone, or you're going to use your private messaging within your company to either Slack them or instant message them or email them and say, hey, is this legit? Again, like you said, any owner is going to be happy that you verified before sending off any dollar amount to someone.
Yeah, look, I wish I had a button and I could slap and I could pop something up on the screen right now, because you just hit a really important safeguard. Or not even safeguard, location to look for information. With texts, right, a lot of the mobile carriers are getting better, right?
Yeah.
You get a call, it sometimes says spam, right? You get a text, I'm sure everyone gets these because I get way too many of them. A random text where it's like, hey there, like, how are you doing? Or like, it's been a long time since we last chatted, right? They're just trying to get you to engage before the ask. But it's easy because if you're talking to the owner, in a text message, it's going to be from that same number. But what you said is one that is really important that not enough people focus on. Look at the email address. Because if you think about email, right, when you get it, imagine my screen is the inbox. It says a name and the subject line, but it does not say the email address unless you do the hover over like you mentioned. And that's where you might see it's like, jeff@broadloom.technology.com. Like everyone tries to use these different domains or things that look close. We get ones that say like, googlesupport.com. Well, Google's URL is not googlesupport.com. So definitely check that. That's a great call. But email, text, just verify. It's always, it's sort of similar to, installing floors, right? It's measure twice, cut once. So let's just, do that extra measure there before we start cutting up this carpet. Okay, let's pull up the next question. Oh, well, here we go, Christine, right from what you shared. So I also really like what you mentioned in the webinar about the culture. I don't think that's discussed enough. We
Mhm.
often talk about how to respond to it, how to avoid it. And that's more on like the fraud side, probably less on like the spam side. And there's sort of a
Mhm.
area between those two. Um, but how can you make sure that employees follow the proper protocol? And I think what you said, starting with culture, right? Like,
Yep. Mhm.
making it out super clear for everyone to understand. It's always an expectation setting, right? Because
Right.
sometimes someone might think that this is okay, or it's harmless. This isn't hurting anyone, but having a employee guideline handbook, book of culture, reinforcing that in sales meetings. It's very similar to some of the things that we do at Broadloom. We take a lot of trainings on IT security,
Right.
um, you know, uh, you know, different harassment, protocols and whatnot. And we do those every year, to show that we are not only in compliance, but more importantly, that our teams understand, these very important subjects and, how to act. So from your side, I know you gave a couple notes, but let's just repercolate them. What would you do if this is your store, Christine, to make sure your employees are following those protocols?
Well, I would, number one, make sure that, like you said, that they're written down, that they're in a handbook or a manual. I would spend the money to make sure that I have an online class or something that they can take annually, um, so that they see and are just reminded, friendly reminders. Hey, this happens. If you hear a coworker possibly making a mistake, just pop your head up and say, hey, wait, I don't think you should do that. Um, you know, the biggest employees want to be respected and trusted and paid fairly. But, if you're going to have a meeting like this, make it a lunch meeting, provide them with some food. Um, those things go a long way, to promoting the right culture, to say, hey, we know that this is important. We want to make sure that it's important, and we're going to spend some time and money on it.
And I think there's also another option in there that you just had me think of,
Yeah.
which is facilitating or creating a place, location for other employees to, maybe anonymously say, look, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I heard or saw this thing and it just didn't, sit right.
Right.
There should be a way that you are empowering your employees to speak up, right?
Exactly.
And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, should I incentivize them?" No, because then they're going to, you get into this ticky tacky thing, right? This goes into your culture,
Mm-hmm.
and it also goes into sort of like how to build long lasting relationships with your employees. Once you have that culture set and you're taking care of them, they're going to start to act as owners, right? They're going to act on behalf of the business
Mm-hmm.
and not just view it as a paycheck. So
Right.
I just love that you tapped into that culture side, because I think it's so often missed when talking about internal processes for things like fraud and spam.
Yep.
Once they feel as they're part of the business, you're going to start to see them act like owners and help protect the business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's pull up another question. All right. What is considered suspicious activity in hindsight? What should I be looking for? Now, I know we talked about a lot of this in our last fraud webinar. So if you guys
Right.
haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It has some great reenactments of typical frauds that have plagued the industry. But Christine, what are just a few things, if I'm a flooring store owner, or if I'm on the management team, or a CPA, or the accountant there, because sometimes, some of these suspicious activities go through and you don't find out till a little late. So what are some of the things, in hindsight, we always know it's 2020, but in terms of what things to look for, Christine, what are things that stand out to you?
That people, like, every employee should be forced to take a week off, a full week that they're away from their job, because that's when you can find out what might be happening, because you've got somebody else in the position doing the job, looking at what that person does on a day-to-day basis, and they're going to see something that just doesn't look right. Making sure that people are all cross-trained, so that if someone does, this is just good business practice. Somebody wins the lottery and doesn't come in, you've got somebody who can fill in. But also, if you are suspicious that something's happening, you've got somebody who can, go in behind that person and make sure things are being done correctly. So if somebody's not wanting to take time off, they're either a workaholic or they're doing something suspicious. So I can admit to being a workaholic, so I understand that part, but we all know that time away is important. The other thing is, like, has an employee's personality changed? When people are hiding things, they get nervous, their personality just changes. They may be shorter with people. If they pull up in a car that you're like, how did they afford that? Or they bought a new house and you know how much you're paying them. And, those things are hindsight, what you should be looking for. Higher level employees, maybe you want them to all get some sort of periodic background check, because you're going to see things that are happening in their personal life that you may not see when they're at work.
Absolutely. And look, Christine, you're in a safe space here. I'm Jeffrey, and I'm a workaholic. But if those people, getting outside of that, look, what you just shared is not a crazy or radical idea.
Yeah.
In terms of giving people time off, especially if you're seeing things moving around. Like you mentioned, it's always good to unplug, right? Even when I unplug, I come back, and while I'm on vacation or I'm off, I'm like, man, everything's a little bit more clear for me. I'm clear-headed. You see things differently. It gives you a good reset. But that idea is not radical. In fact, in a lot of industries where there is fraud and there is suspicious activity, that is a mandate. And while the flooring industry is radically different from the financial industry, that is a big thing you see in asset management and in the financial sector, where people that are doing investments and actively managing people's accounts to avoid a Ponzi scheme, right? And this is essentially the same thing that can occur in your flooring business, right? We're moving things around to give the perception of either growth or sales or something, and everything's looking good, and then you realize the product never got picked up. They give, or they don't give, they make employees, a lot of financial institutions, make employees take off a month. And it's so that their books sort of even out. And if there is something suspicious that they've been trying to hide during that month, it starts to rear its head.
Yeah.
And look, sometimes they don't even enforce it for specific people, but just the idea that that is something, that could come is a tool to help fight some of the fraud. So in terms of suspicious activities, if someone pulls up in a Ferrari or a McLaren, probably might want to double check some things here. But at the end of the day, I think what you said is the most important one. It's reading your people, right? These are people that you work with every day. You know them, you know how they act. And if they're acting shifty or something's up, look, it might not even be fraud. It's just good business to check in on your employees and see what's going on. So, sort of having that extra EQ, that emotional intelligence to help identify these things. All right. I think we might have one or two. All right. Why does there seem to be so much more fraud now than in the past? I definitely have an answer for that, but Christine, I'm going to let you take that one first.
Well, number one, it's kind of like when you buy a car, you start seeing that car on the road more because you're more aware of it. So we're here, like, people are more open. Before, I think people were like, oh my gosh, I got scammed, I don't want to tell people. Because because that's embarrassing. But now people are coming out. Plus, everything is electronic. You have the fraudsters who can concentrate on 4 or 5 or 6 different businesses at once versus just one. So, that's why I think there seems to be so much more fraud. Is it's easier to commit it now because things are done electronically. That's why it's important to make sure that your passwords are kept safe, that you are protecting your computer and running those malware checks, and that you're not clicking on emails from some Nigerian prince that will give you $500,000 if you send him back 200,000. So, yeah, that's my short answer.
The Nigerian prince was a scam?
It was, sorry, Jeff.
I need to check my emails then. I haven't heard back in a while, but
Yeah.
Look, my answer is the exact same, just with a slight nuance. It's the technology, right? For instance, at home, just from a good sort of internet security perspective, I use a VPN, and with a couple of clicks, I can look like I'm in New Jersey, New York, LA, Texas, like back to back to back. Creating pop-up phone numbers, fake ones. You can go into Google and literally have a Google number in all these different locales. And then with technology, criminals have gotten very sophisticated of weaving all those concepts together and essentially doing this en masse, right? And just seeing who takes the bait. A lot of people ask, like, why do people do this? Like, why do I get all these weird emails? Why do I get all these weird texts? I'm not falling for it. People are. That's why they exist. That's why you see them all the time. Yep. And technology just makes it so incredibly easy. But that's why we love things like our payment tool, because it flags it, right? It can help you flag fraud before it gets out of hand and before it sort of puts you in this topsy-turvy situation. So definitely look for the signs, check on your employees, use technology to combat it. And, I'd say, at least from my lens, those are 3 really easy to access examples of how to combat it. Christine, anything that I missed there?
Nope. I think you've covered it.
All right. Well, I'll see if anyone else has any questions. It doesn't look like we have any popping up. All right. Well, Christine, thank you as always. Yes. Such a wealth of knowledge and super practical and easy for a lot of retailers to action on. Oh, we almost got out of here. We got a question from Thomas Easters. All right. Do you go over safeguards for moto sales? If not, can you skim briefly? Moto sales. Familiar, Christine?
I am not familiar, but I could Google that.
Yeah, we got technology over here. But Thomas, you are right now the live question. So if you can help us add what moto is, while Christine checks it on her side. This is good. New question. I haven't seen this one before. All right.
I am just getting motorcycle stuff.
Okay. Moto sales. The only things I'm starting to think of is like, I'm thinking of more like supply chain and payments of like FIFO and life, like all those sort of things. Okay, here we go. Mail order. Phone. All right. I haven't heard that one before, Thomas, but thank you for introducing us to that term. Okay. Mail order over the phone, Christine.
I think you follow the same procedures no matter what. If it's over the phone, and this kind of goes back to our last webinar, they're calling you over the phone. They said they need it immediately. They don't care about the color. Those should throw up red flags left and right. If it's, mail order or online, make sure that you have software in place that will verify the credit cards, that will ensure that it's not a stolen card, or that it's not going to be, bounced back to you later. Especially over the phone, I try to get people to come in into your shop or to your warehouse. If they're going to have somebody else pick it up, another red flag.
Okay. So, look, I don't know how frequent mail order over the phone orders are. So I assume, Thomas, you have a good amount of them, but those to me always kind of feel like the most dangerous ones. Those are ones where it just something feels a little off. So, Thomas, I'm interested if you have a lot of those coming in, and other people on the stream as well. Is that something very frequent? And again, if the names don't match, one's out of state. And one thing that we're going to do is when the stream is over, in the description, we're going to link to our other fraud webinar so you can see the examples. Because, Thomas, it literally covers the example you're talking about and all the things to look for red flags specific to over the phone or mail order purchases or requests to purchase. So definitely check that out. But yeah, the safeguards, I would say, are ways to verify to make sure that these are the right numbers or the right credit card or legit credit cards, requesting the ID that matches that. So I think there's plenty of ways for you to navigate that to avoid getting scammed. All right. So I think that's all we got for today. Any other questions? We had a couple more people popping on, talking about real world fraud prevention. Anything else, Thomas? All right. I think that's it for today. Well, thank you as always, Christine. Awesome information, helping flooring businesses safeguard, what matters most to them, and that's their livelihood. All right, so that takes us out of another Webinar Wednesday. I'm Jeff Fever. Thank you for joining us, and I am here with
Christine Poplau.
All right, y'all have a wonderful Wednesday and rest of week.